Nice. It works. I gotta feel like this is like in my nose. Good evening. How are you tonight? You're all here at 7 o'clock. It's dark outside. Melting snow. It's a big slushy out there. Well, thank you for coming tonight and being here in person. We have several online. I want to thank everyone for coming out and supporting Dr. Cranston and his work. My name is Angela Jaime. I am an enrolled member of the Pitt River Tribe in Northern California, and I am also the Vice Provost Indigenous Engagement here at the University of Saskatchewan. And it is my honor and pleasure to provide opening remarks for this evening's celebratory event. I offer these words to you all. The land is acknowledged as our mother, the earth. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honor and support the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to the land of Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to working towards mending colonized lands and protecting the land in a way that demonstrates honor, respect, and love. The University of Saskatchewan extends this commitment to the lands and treaty territories 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 that constitute Saskatchewan, the Swift Current, and all Indigenous peoples that call Saskatchewan home. We are born to the land, and the land claims us. Tonight, we have an exciting event planned for you. The format of this evening will be much like a fireside chat with the author. Drs. Paulson and Cranston will discuss the book, and then we will open up the discussion to the audience for questions. During the question and answer, I'll be passing around the mic, and we ask that you speak into the mic so that those that are online can hear the question and then also the responses. I would first like to introduce our host for the evening, Dean of the College of Education, Dr. Julia Paulson. Dr. Paulson was appointed Dean in 2023. She was previously a professor of education, peace, and conflict at the University of Bristol, UK, where she retains an honorary professorship. Julia's research explores the relationships between peace, conflict, and education with a focus on teaching about injustice and violence, memory studies, and transitional justice. She is well known for her comparative work on truth commissions and their impact on educational and curricular change. Dr. Paulson's co-leads the Education, Justice, and Memory Network, working in 13 countries on creative approaches to teaching and learning about past violence and injustice. She recently shared the network's research during the International Day of Education panels held in the United Nations headquarters in New York City last week. Well done, you. Julia was born in Treaty 6 territory in St. Albert, Alberta, and is delighted and honored to return to the prairies with her partner and 2 children. Please welcome Dr. Paulson to the stage. Dr. Cranston, Mr. Jerome Cranston, is a race-conscious scholar, educator who focuses his energy and time on uncovering the overt and covert ways that racialized ideologies, structures, and institutions create and maintain racial inequality and injustice with a goal of collectively finding solutions that can lead to greater equity, racial justice, and build healthier communities. He is a much sought-after presenter, consultant, and educator on the topics of systematic racism and social inequality. Dr. Cranston holds degrees from multiple institutions in Canada focused on science, educational leadership, teaching, learning, and student experience. Dr. Cranston is currently the Vice Provost Students and Learning at the University of Saskatchewan, as well as holding academic appointments in the Departments of Educational Foundations and Educational Administration at the College of Education here at the university. Previously, he served as the Dean of Education at the University of Regina, as well as Executive Director for Student Engagement and Success, and Associate Professor at the University of Manitoba. Over his career, he has served on a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion and human rights advisory committees and working groups. Most recently, Jerome was the project lead and architect of the Equity and Racial Justice Learning Program developed in partnership with the Canadian School Boards Association. Dr. Cranston's book, Half Caste, Decidedly Brown in a Black or White World, chronicles his journey towards self-acceptance. It is the exploration of the complexities of racial identity and how it can be fluid and evolving amidst the constraints that society tries to place upon us. I was particularly struck by Dr. Cranston's candidness in regards to his experience as a child, a young man, and an adult. The constant theme of people asking him, "Where are you from?" Or, "What is your background?" Or more poignantly, and after clearly being dissatisfied with his answers to their questions, "Where do you really come from?" All are resounding messages, or of "you don't belong here," hurled at him throughout his life. I remember the first time I came into contact with Dr. Cranston's brilliance. I had signed up for a webinar he was offering during COVID. I was new to Canada and was intrigued by the topic, systematic racism in education. I had come from the United States and was desperately searching for someone to affirm all I do as a scholar and educator in this new place I was living. As I listened to him speak, I felt elated by his words and grounded that there were others who do the work I engage in daily. He said one thing I immediately wrote down on a sticky and to this day hangs on my monitor at home. EDI will not work without critically challenging the systematic oppression in the institution. Dr. Cranston has shared with us all the struggles and challenges of invisible taxes non-white people are obligated to pay, the public systematic racism of people in power forcing us to declare our race and ethnicity, and deciding what our people are capable of doing. He has opened the door to his life through the challenges of non-white athletes, navigating the gatekeepers of the academic institutions, parenting his children, Kayla, who's joining us here today, and I assume Ty and Cody, who are online watching, teaching them to be proud of the skin that wraps around them. And above all, the beautiful relationship with his life partner and best friend Janet, who watches us tonight, also online. I'm emotional because it's the message that all of us brown folk want to hear, right? We get affirmed by it. I am proud and honored to be part of the space tonight and an everyday colleague of Dr. Cranston as we work to break down the barriers of racism, bigotry, and oppression. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Jerome Cranston.
Thank you, Angela. Welcome to our fireside.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to start by giving a warm thank you to our colleagues in the University Library for hosting us tonight. This is the beautiful education library space, perfect for such events, so thank you. for the support of our library colleagues in hosting us. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Jerome, for this book. I wondered if we wanted to start with a reading.
Sure. I'm not going to start at the beginning for those of you who have read the book, and with deep appreciation for my cousin, Angela, and my colleague. I'll give you something that is slightly lighter, but I think you'll understand the message. And so before I start this section, let me preface it by saying everything in the book is real. And so the character, their names aren't real. The character, Hardy, who I'm going to read in chapter 17, shortly after the book came up, reached out, and we had a Zoom chat with Hardy and his partner. And Hardy's absolute embarrassment, and Hardy's invitation of, why didn't you tune me up? Like, why didn't you do something in the moment? And I think you'll understand why. This is chapter 17, if you bear with me. I know, Hardy replied, but you're mulatto, right? I forced a smile I'd learned for the occasion, when I felt the urge to say, are you fucking out of your mind? Over many years, I found that there is little value, even if there is some satisfaction in uttering those words. The smile had become a bit of a defense mechanism. Nope, sorry, Hardy, I'm not mulatto. I'm just brown. A simple brown man trying to make a living. I replied with a bit of an upbeat tone because I just liked how it sounded. It actually makes me smile when I say it. Just a simple brown man. Hardy seemed genuinely confused and slightly disoriented. Yeah, I know that, he pressed, but like, you're mulatto, right? You know, half black. And get serious. There's nothing simple when it comes to you. Is he really saying this? I was surprised. Hardy was no stranger or acquaintance. We had spent quite a bit of time together. Denial is the first stage of grief. We're not having this conversation, I thought. Yet I knew I was in for more disorienting, destabilizing explanations of who I was from people who did not know. Our family, me, my spouse, and our 3 kids, had lived across the street from the settlers on an suburban street lined with elm trees for almost 10 years. Our kids, his 2 kids, and almost all of the kids on the street had played together over the years. We had kind of vacationed together. Hardy and his wife Delilah had hosted our family at their beautiful cottage one summer. We had rung in several New Year's Eves over at Hardy and Delilah's house, visiting and celebrating while warming ourselves around a fire pit as the neighborhood kids played pond hockey on the massive rink Hardy had handcrafted in their backyard. I had to think of a way to let Hardy down gently, and I had to reset to a neutral place as if this had never ever happened before. No, really, Hardy, I'm not mulatto. I just come from some dark-skinned South Asian grandparents, I gently replied. I didn't want to explain the Nepalese and tribal communities and the mixed-race Anglo-Burmese, Anglo-Indians, and whatever else I might be. I just grabbed at a geographic location that I had used before and waited for the conversation to be over. Then the party line pickup happened. That annoying time when people feel free to wander into any conversation, pick up on the last thing they heard, and repeat it back as if to say, I'm here now, and demand to be let into this conversation, no matter how personal it is or how wrongfully misinterpreted when I was half listening. Your salvation? Blurted out Hardy's brother-in-law, Larry, utterly lost in the conversation but wanting to join in. I'm what? Salvation, he repeated, laughing for no reason that I could understand. Your salvation? I didn't know that you were salvation. Hardy and Delilah had invited me and Janet over to their house for an evening with them and Delilah's sister, Daisy, and her husband, Larry. Appetizers, beer, wine, and conversation. It was simple and sounded perfect. We had gotten to know Daisy and Larry as they had moved onto the street a few years earlier in order to raise their children closer to their cousins. We enjoyed all of their company. They're the kind of neighbors we all want. No, Larry, I'm South Asian. Well, kind of. or at least my maternal parents were from places in what is now South Asia, I replied. Larry waited a moment to consider what I had said. Then he repeated, South Asian. Phew. Okay, I thought you said you were Salvation, like, you know, the Salvation Army Church. I always thought you were Catholic, so I was totally confused. Larry drew back his focus on the beer in his hand. I felt like the conversation had quickly descended down a rabbit hole, or rather into an entangled warren of religious confusion and racialized identity politics, a maze from which I might never return. Is he black? No. He says he's brown. Is that lowercase brown-skinned or brown? Maybe brown is code for biracial or racially mixed? No, wait. He clearly said he's brown. What race is brown? I could see confusion all over Hardy's face.
Thank you. That passage gives us a sense of the book as one that's about your personal journey, navigating identity, family, race, and racism, and the ways that that personal journey has been forced upon you in many ways by your everyday encounters, where people insist on hearing your navigation of that journey. So I've got questions on that, and then we'll open up to our friends and colleagues here. One thing that resonates through the book in its title, in the ways that you've shared in the reading so far, is that you, despite having this forced upon you, have arrived at an identity that you're comfortable in insisting on. So I thought we could start by sharing that with the audience. How is it that you choose to be identified in the world, Jerome?
Yeah, so I emigrated with my family at age 4 to Canada. We came over on a boat. We immigrated north of the city of Montreal in a very francophone community. I knew from childhood I wasn't white, but I didn't actually know what I was. And it's one thing to know you're not white when you're surrounded by a sea of white faces and kind classmates and children and teachers, but you know you don't look like anyone else. You see the class photos, and in some cases, we're going back quite a few years, when photos weren't necessarily color coordinated as well as they are now, it's like, oh, I'm not even sure that's me. I just see actually a really dark dot in that picture. So you know you're not white. And for those of you who've read the book, my mom had an identity she wanted me to have, but it was not an identity I could ever accept. It didn't feel real or comfortable. So I knew I wasn't white. I knew I wasn't, even though my mom insisted, Anglo-Indian. I knew that my maternal grandma was tribal. I didn't know what her original name was. I didn't know what her original language was. I didn't know where she came from. All of that was part of the package of the people I descend from. You never look back. You only look forward. So what's behind you doesn't matter. So where you came from doesn't matter. But I knew that my maternal grandma had been given the name Margaret Rosalind Rosie Brown. And I knew I was brown. And so for life, I have always presented myself as brown. And I've been called in by other communities who are so generous, Indigenous communities, Latino, Latinx communities, Black communities, through kinship. But I know I'm brown. And so it's interesting because I adamant, and I do a lot of work in the education system with, the sort of self-declaration things we get around identity. And I haven't seen the Canadian census recently, but typically, in terms of your identity, you can put white, you can put black, and then they move to geographic location. Chinese, Filipino, South Asian. There might be something potentially, for other places. And then there's other. And dang, I tick off other all the time, and I write in brown. And I have no idea if anybody in Statistics Canada pays attention to it, but that's who I am. And that's who I'm always going to be. And my kids are brown. And they know they're brown. And when I get to hang out with cousins like Angela, we're brown. We know we're brown. We call it in. And when I get to hang out with cousins who are black, and they're like, yeah, but you sure as heck are one of us. And so I get called in that way. And so, yeah. It took a long time, though, because everything in the world tries to shape your identity and tell you who you are and who you're supposed to be. So my claiming to be brown is a bit of a resistance to the way that folks want to portray me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to pick up on that resistance in the next question, because you navigate through the book the ways that people ask for your identity, feel entitled to ask for your identity straight away. Mm-hmm. Strangers in a coffee shop is the opening vignette in the book. And also try to fit you into a system of racialization, often with racialized binaries, where your past and present, as you said, don't fit easily into those binaries that they're presenting you with. So here in Canada, where you've called home for more than 50 years, your personal history's been demanded of you, like you said, and write about in a way that mine hasn't of me. I have that same unknowingness about ancestors and a look forward to the present rather than the past, but I never have to justify that. No one ever asks me about it. I don't need to find a way to claim some kind of ethnic or cultural heritage, right? So as you've had to navigate that, in the book you talk about how this has led you to claim your identity as an immigrant strongly and to push back strongly against the term person of color. So I'd love if you can talk us through why these positions are important to you, how they fit with this identity as brown.
Sure. So when I look at this amazing collection of humanity, what I see are a lot of people of color. They all are people of color, right? And you got color. Some of you have never had to confront the fact that you're a color. Mm-hmm. So the notion of people of color, first of all, to me, it's a bit of a misnomer in terms of the title. Because I work in this space as a critical race scholar, though, without giving a big lecture, I can actually tell you that the whole notion of people of color prior to the incredible Dr. Martin Luther King and others using it as a rally call actually traces back to the slave trade. And for the French and for the Spanish, they created a category of human being. The French is les gens libres de couleur. The Spanish would be gens de couleur libre. So these were free colored people. And so this was this new category that sat in between white and black slaves who were indentured serfs who essentially had to do sort of menial labor. They were quite often from mixed race. And so the etymology of the word actually matters to me also. And I'm not just a person of color. Again, I wake up in the morning, I look in the mirror, and I see a hue of brown that I've become so comfortable with looking right back at me. That's my color. Just as when I do a lot of work with audiences of various races, I can look out at white faces and say, I see a lot of white people in the room. Because for those of you who don't know, you're white. I mean, that's what you are, right? And so you're white. Some folks are black. Some of us are brown. And there are hues and shades in between. And it is, to my amazing cousin, Angela, it's being comfortable in the skin we live in. And so that matters to me. And it is interesting. There's a section in a book where I talk about working in a university context where my supervisor actually pushes back and says, can't you just be happy as a person of color? I'm like, okay, that's where you want to put me. It's not where I belong. And so it is constantly this dynamic relationship of where do I want to belong? And I know where I want to belong.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And an immigrant is an important part for you as well.
Yeah, and so the immigrant part is key to me. As I mentioned earlier, I arrived in Canada at 4 years old. And when you're 4, you don't know much. Maybe some of you were savants in terms of being children. I wasn't, or a protege. My older siblings, I'm the youngest, and there's only 2 of us still surviving. When they turned 18, it used to be the immigration rules in Canada, you could just get Canadian citizenship. When I turned 18, I didn't claim it. I wasn't sure I belonged here. My life experience up to that point in time didn't actually tell me I belonged here. And so it took me 35 years. I waited until I was 39 years old to write the citizenship test. And for any of you who are immigrants to Canada, you know what that test? It's tough. I mean, I went to school here, and I still had to study for that test. And I still wrote the test and was scared that I might actually fail the test. And for those of us who are immigrants, literally, it's not just sort of, a vernacular cliche, we can actually be sent back somewhere. Like if we fail the test and we don't get accepted into this country, they can actually literally send us home. And so being an immigrant matters to me a lot. I carry dual citizenship. I carry my British citizenship. My youngest, who Angela introduced, Cody, played professional football, American football in Germany and claimed his British citizenship, so was a non-import player playing NFL football in Germany and is so proud of his heritage and background. But I will never stop knowing I'm an immigrant. I came over on a boat in the low, low chambers of a boat, not on the upper deck. And I had to work hard to be a Canadian, hard. And again, with respect to those of you who were born Canadians, I'm not sure you realize how hard those of us who are immigrants have to work. We have to work to get that citizenship, and we never take it for granted. And if we carry dual passports, the reality is, should we commit a federal crime that's serious enough, they can revoke our Canadian citizenship and send us home. And so for those of us who aren't born here, even though we may have lived our entire life here, if we commit a crime, we may not go to jail. We're experiencing this here in Saskatchewan. We may not go to jail. We might be sent packing. And so we know that as immigrants. And so, yeah, it is part of who I am.
Thank you. I think that's important to hear and highlight. I want to talk about writing.
Yep.
Yeah. So this book is written as a memoir. It's poignant, it's vulnerable, it's personal. Behind it also are your decades of research and reading and praxis as a race-conscious education researcher. They inform the pages, but the writing is not in an academic style. Like I say, it's so honest, it's so complicated and complex, it's so vulnerable in a way that academic texts, I wrote rarely are, but basically never are, right? So I want to hear how you made this shift and how hard it was. It's really admirable. It makes the reading so gripping. But how hard was it? And were there parts that came more easily than others?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yeah. So first, the book is a gift to my children. I want my children to know where we come from. I don't want them to live with the unknowns, and there are lots of unknowns in the book, but I want them to be able to look at who they are and where we came from and to have some grounding in it. So it started off as a gift to my children. The chapter that was the hardest, and for those of you who've read the book, you'll know it, and if you haven't read the book, please feel free to buy a copy and read the book. The chapter about my brother Keith. I was 24 years old, he was 27, and in terms of sibling love, he was everything. He was my biggest supporter and fan, but also, in terms of siblings, also, my biggest tormentor at the exact same time. Having to write that chapter, it didn't reopen trauma, but it actually forced me back into a space of forgiving my parents. I mean, that's what it was. Writing that chapter had to remind me, my parents have both passed, but it reminded me that I was never going to be able to move forward if I didn't forgive my parents. And that was a big deal. And again, if you've read the book, my life partner, Janet, is the most incredible human being, period. It's not even I've ever met. Writing those chapters and being able to forgive her family for what she was put through by choosing me. So there were moments in it. In fact, I actually had to ask Janet if I could write that part because there was no way I wanted to be disrespectful to my kids' grandparents. That was the big thing. I could not disrespect the grandparents who loved them. And so I had to ask her permission to write it. And so in terms of style, this is how I would write every single day. One of my biggest struggles is coming into academia is to learn to write like an academic. I do not write like an academic. This is, I've been in higher ed for 16 years. And among the things that reviewers tell me, and that they are right, is I over-reference, I oversight, and I seem to feel this need to stand on the shoulders of 47 different scholars before I say my own piece. And I've gotten to the point now where I think I'm well enough established. But for many of us, and I'd say this is for, in terms of cisgendered, female, racialized, indigenous scholars, we constantly feel like we have to prove ourselves. Like we have to prove we're smart. And so I got to prove to you when I write something that I've read everything and I know it really well. And so I had to kind of get out of that. And one of the comments by one of the content editors that I worked with is, "You sound like an academic." I'm like, "What?" They said, "You sound like an academic. Just tell your story. Trust your story." They said, "It's your story that's going to carry the book." And I'd say, 9 times out of 10, I think I did a really good job with that in the book. I think occasionally I slide back into sounding like a professor because I've been programmed over 15 years to sound that way. But this is how I write. I mean, this is what I want to do. I'm very honest with myself. I love writing. I'll never make a living as a writer. That wasn't the intent of the book. I love writing. Absolutely adore it. And this is me.
I think you did a remarkable job of not sounding like an academic.
Thanks.
But still, like doing that teaching, it's still very much a book that can be used for teaching about race and racism, right? So it's doing that job too, which is phenomenal. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, very impressive writing. Read the book. Towards the end, you write, "Making peace with the fact that the question, so where are you really from, will never be answerable because of the various injustices perpetrated on my ancestors has been difficult. Those threads, those bonds, and any heritage that would have flowed through them to me are irreparable." For those who haven't had a chance to read the book in full, do you want to talk about those broken threads and the ways that colonial violence has given you an inheritance of questions rather than certainties?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it in public forum quite a bit. And so my parents, and I always say my parents loved us as best as they could. And yes, my father was prone to violence, there's no doubt about it. And my mom, I think like a lot of moms, has her favorites. And so, those things are very true. But they wanted the best for us. And it literally was this, it doesn't matter where you came from, it's what you're going to be in life. And there is this inherent struggle. One of my, I would say dear friends, but he actually reached out to me this morning, unable to come to the book talk, and he's from Treaty 1 territory. I mean, I'll call him by name. It's Nagan Sinclair, who calls me his brother all the time. That's the son of Murray Sinclair. And if you're familiar with Murray Sinclair, the 4 questions, part of it is, knowing where you're from, for Indigenous folks, and reaching back to that strength and that cultural, linguistic, ontological strength, and how important that is in terms of going forward. And it is. But for those of us who come from this fractured coloniality where we can't go back, I know my mom and my dad, and I have vague understandings. I mean, again, I have a grandma. I don't know what her real name is. 100% don't know what her real name is. I know the stories I was told, and they're exposed in the book, that my mom was prone to not telling the truth. That's absolutely true. I have a grandpa who there was a story, my maternal grandpa, there was a story about who he was, but that's actually not the truth, and the truth will always be sort of a partial truth. My dad, who was orphaned at 14, and orphaned in the most violent ways, that one actually chokes me up, because when I think about what my dad had to endure, first to actually have to go down to a train station and identify his father, and this is the story he told us growing up, by a wrist and a watch, because it was bombed, and all that was left was a wrist and a watch. And then again, I walk around, I haven't walked around enough around Saskatoon, but I walk around enough Canadian cities to see the monuments that are put up and the schools that are named after, Sir Winston Churchill. And I don't take anything away from the greatness, but to also note that Sir Winston Churchill created a famine in West Bengal, created it. I mean, it's one of these ones where, intended outcome was supposed to be positive in terms of, the war, but that my paternal grandma would die of malnutrition. My dad could never utter the word starvation. It was always just malnutrition, but malnutrition is just not malnutrition. And so to not know that, to not have the depth to go back to, again, I look at amazing cousins like Angela, like Liz, to others who are able to talk about their aunties and their grandmas, and I'm like, yeah. I have a terrific colleague who I worked with at the University of Regina, and we got along really well. Very tied in with the Indigenous community, a member of the Indigenous community, and we'd get together, we'd have these conversations, and she would say, Jerome, I consulted the chiefs. I went to the community. I talked to the matriarchs, I got their support. And I literally would be in conversations with her, trying to figure out how we're moving forward in this world, in an education system. And I'd say, I got me. Like, there is no community of brown people. So I don't have chiefs, and I don't have grandmas, and and so I got to try to figure this out on my own. And so I will say, and then I shift gears. Mm-hmm. It's why the kinship that I've been offered by First Nations, by Métis, by the Black community in Canada, it's been incredible. Sidebar, next week I'm going to do a similar book talk, and Julie was kind enough. I wanted this to be the first. Like, I really wanted it to be here. Mm-hmm. I'm so happy to be here at USask. I really am, and I don't pretend any institution is perfect. I'm happy to be at this one. So I'm going to be at University of Lethbridge next week. The colleague who invited me in is the Vice Provost, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. I've known her for 6 years, an immigrant originally from St. Lucia, brilliant Black woman. She's like, Jerome, we're bringing you in for Black History Month. And I'm like, Martha, I'm not Black. She goes, no, I know you're not Black, but everything in your life is the Black experience. And she said, so I'm not bringing you in and pretending you're Black, but you're going to talk about the lives we live. She also told me, she cried when she read the book. She said, there's so much in the book that speaks to her experience as an immigrant Black woman in Canada. So without knowing where I come from, the communities who have invited me and called me in, they've been everything to me, everything. And I'm unbelievably indebted to them because they have made me feel like I belong.
Thank you. I've got a few more questions, but sure. I'm going to ask one, and then I'll open the floor, and Angela will help us take questions from the floor. We were talking, the three of us, before we started. You've spent your life as an educator. Mm-hmm. You don't write too much about that role and those experiences in the book, and I wondered if there's any reflections or thoughts you want to share, stories maybe that didn't make it into these pages, about your experience as a brown teacher, a brown principal, a brown professor, a brown vice provost, any of the above. And so it's so first, it's insightful. We had this conversation about what's not in the book, and Angela and Julia hit it, and I'm like, in the rush to write the book, I left that out. So I'll give you this is this piece that actually it doesn't go away. It's not like this is sort of one and done type thing. My first teaching job. So I went through a faculty of education at the University of Alberta. I knew I didn't look like anyone else there in the faculty of education. I went and I was an elementary education teacher, French as a second language. So then put a brown face in that space, you already stick out. But my first teaching job was south of Calgary in Okotoks, a really nice community where we settled, and Kayla was born, and just unbelievable. But before I got the teaching job, my partner Janet and I were walking down the street, and at that time there were maybe 7,000-8,000 people in the town, and a young mom walked past us on the street, two little kids, and
the little boy, after they passed us, cocked his head back to look at me and then turned to his mom. And then, as innocent as the words would be, said to his mom, "Is that a black man?" At which point I realized, I think I know where I am now in terms of teaching. Before I started teaching, the principal of the school toured me around the school and wanted people to know who the new teacher was. And we went into this one classroom. He introduced me, and the kids were grade 4 or grade 5, and they were making noise like kids in grade 4 or grade 5 would. And he eventually gets them to settle down and said, "I want to introduce you to Mr. Cranston." And this one hand kind of shoots up, looks over at me, looks at the principal and says, "Is that the new bus driver?" And so then I would become a principal of a school here in Saskatchewan in a rural community. And I would be invited to the grand opening. So, for those of you who have been here a long time, when we used to build the big grain terminals, the big cement grain terminals, there were these grand openings of the grain terminals. So I got invited to a grain terminal opening because I was principal of an all-girls Catholic school, the first principal who wasn't a nun. And so the nuns made the decision to ask me, because they're like, "We thought we were going to hire a woman. Then we met you, and you're the person we want." I'm like, "Okay." So I went to this, nice event, opening up of the grain elevator. I'm walking around, and I am most of the time a keep to myself kind of person. This one really nice man comes up, and I mean nice, right? And he looks at me and he said, "You must be the new manager of the grain elevator." I'm like, "No, why?" "Well, they told me it was a dark fellow." And I'm like, "Okay." So, no, I didn't write some of these parts in. To be quite honest, now that we've had the conversation, if I wrote them in, it wouldn't be a 115-page book. Like, it would be going on. And then I'll shift. I think I may have told you this story, Julia. I had the good fortune of being a dean of education at the University of Regina for 5 years. And I was so appreciative to be in that space. And my decanal colleagues were amazing. The very first meeting, so it must have been October of my first year, they said, "We're going to have a report back from the Women's Caucus." The women's deans had breakfast together, and they talked about, the gender inequalities, inequities, and, the challenges they face. A couple of white women, get up and they present, and it's clear, like there's some massive gender equality pieces going on. So I sit there, let it pass. The spring meeting rolls around, and it happens again. So, because I am who I am, I shoot my hand up and someone says, "Yes, Jerome, what is it?" I said, I'd like to make a report too." And they're like, "Well, what's your report on?" I said, "Well, I'd like to report from the Black and Brown Caucus of Deans." And they're like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to report on our caucus." And they're like, "Well, you're the only one." I said, "Yeah, I know. I went to Starbucks. I had a chat with the barista, so I'm reporting on our conversation." And they all just kind of looked at me. I'm like, Look at the room. And so I was fortunate. There were 2 Indigenous women who became deans, and I know it has changed slightly, but I know you were in that space, and there's so much work to do. I quite often say this, and I'm not alone. I look around this room, and I know who's in the room with me. The systems that we belong to, and we only have to take a look at Dr. Gay at Harvard. If you're Indigenous, you're Black, and you're Brown, the higher you get in the system, the bigger price you're going to pay for even the slightest mistake. I won't, again, I won't, excuse, academic dishonesty or plagiarism. But I can tell you, pretty dang up straight, there are dozens of folks sitting in president's office in the US who may have inappropriately cited on their dissertations. They may have paraphrased. I don't see any of them losing their jobs. This isn't to make excuse for anti-Semitism. But that's not what they went after her for. They went after her improper citations on her dissertation. That's what they went after. And so we know that. I feel like I'm giving a bit of a sermon here. Our communities, and this is the Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, and it doesn't mean if you're white, you're not part of this community. But we have a saying. you got to work twice as hard to get half as far. And we say that to each other. You got to work twice as hard to get half as far. I've worked so hard to get here. I am so appreciative to be here on this stage with you, Julia, to be surrounded by this amazing people. But I know how hard I've worked, because the system wasn't built for me. Thanks for asking the questions.
Thanks for writing the book. Thanks for the honor of hosting the first launch.
It's complete privilege for me to be here.
Let's open up to questions from our colleagues here in person and online.
Who wants to ask the first one? Don't be shy.
I would say that the bark is worse than the bite, but that's probably not true.
Excellent. Here you go.
I was just wondering what the process was writing the book, like from start to finish, how long it took you.
That's a good question. So I'm not having to. I had actually written the chapter about my brother first, and that was just something I needed to write, and it was part of an act of forgiveness. I probably wrote that 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I actually thought, I thought I was writing a different book. I started off writing a different book, and so I started off writing a book called The Three Bobs in My Life. And so I've had these 3 amazing Bobs in my life. One is my father, who would always go by Bob. One is my brother, who's 10 years older than me, and I am his guardian. He lives with schizophrenia and has since his 20s. It's referenced in the book. He's my kid's Uncle Bobby. And then I believe I have online an incredible friend named Robert Burton, who in my university years was so instrumental to just accepting me, who I was. So the book started off as the 3 Bobs in my life, and then I realized, but maybe one day I'll write about that. So the actual book took about 3 years, and I admitted to Angela and to Julia, if you've read the book, there are definitely mistakes. And so the last 12 months of getting the book ready, we've had some major health challenges in our life. I lost my sister to cancer. Actually, that's not true. My sister had terminal stage 4 cancer. And on the night that I was given an alumni award by the University of Alberta, she phoned me and said, I need you to, so I'm going to tell you a story because it actually speaks to how hard this book was to write. Said, I need you to just listen to me, Jerome. And again, she's in the book. So, and she verified everything that I was going to write. And then she went through the fact that she had stage 4 terminal cancer. There was no treatment plan. There was nothing in front of her. And she said, other than her husband, before she told her 3 grown sons, she needed to practice and rehearse with me. My sister ended up making a decision to go through a medical assisted death while I was writing the book. My love of my life, my partner, is sitting at RUH watching right now because she has cancer. And so I've written the book. So the book took a long time to write. I tried to do the copy editing in a small little condo when we first moved here to Saskatoon, running to chemo appointments. So probably 6-7 years. And the last 12 months have felt like a sprint to try to get it finished because I realized I can't wait any longer. And Julia and Megan were incredibly kind because I've been wanting to do a book launch, but I haven't been able to pull it off. And when the College of Education offered, I was just so appreciative that they would do this for me. So about 6 years to write the book. The last 12 months, they're a blur. I don't even remember them. So, but about 6 years to write the whole book. The last 3 years really intensely. And it's short. It's only 115 pages, 3 years.
We have a question online.
Great. This is from Tasneem Jesse in the provost office. Hi, Jerome. Thank you for sharing your powerful stories. What advice would you have for first-generation immigrant students and Brown students trying to succeed in academia?
It's probably the advice that I give, which is to reach out and find the people who are going to, and not just mentor you and steward you, but are going to be there consistently for you. It's a tough system. Academia is a tough system. It's tough for all of you who work in it, regardless of whether you think you're an academic or not an academic. These are not easy systems. They're just not. We have a lot of policies and protocols and rules, and some things are written and some things aren't written. And I'd say for those of us who feel like we aren't supposed to be here, who feel like we don't belong, it's not a matter of really finding allies. It's a matter of finding, I'm going to look to Angela, your people. You got to find your people. And for grad students, you got to find the people who will help navigate the system. I'm incredibly honest with the people I work with. I don't believe I can turn a racist into an unracist. Like, I mean, if you're a racist, I'm not sure I'm the person that can fix that. I got other colleagues who I think have much more talent and ability to change hearts and minds than I do. But to your question, Tasneem, I'm 100% here to change the system, to make it a little bit healthier, to make it a little bit more kind, to make it a little bit more generous. It's actually why I took this role. Because I actually think if we tackle the systemic gender inequalities, racial inequalities, we all do better. Every single one of us. As a society, we do better. And so reach out. I've had people set up coffee conversations with me and connect me to amazing people. Don't be afraid to reach out. I've had people say, I know you're really busy, Jerome, but I'd like to have a conversation with you anyway. Just keep reaching out. I've had people, the furthest away, I had someone who was out at Memorial University who came from Ghana, Black woman in ed leadership. And the dean at the time, Dr. Kurt Anderson, actually said, there's a guy in Regina. You should set up a video conference with him. And I had a great conversation with this doctoral student at Memorial University who was never going to work with me or do anything with me. And she just needed someone who looked like her, who had a similar life experience, who she could kind of lean into and lean on to help navigate. So I'd say that's the biggest one. And don't apologize ever for who you are, because I know who you are. What you bring to university, I dedicate the book to folks who are exceptional. You are exceptional. And don't let the system tell you you're not.
Are there other questions in the audience? We have another one online, but we're gonna. Yes. Excuse me.
My question, it really is a macro question. Our society is built on commonality, and our public sector is built that there's a common good, and that representatives from that represent the public at large. I mean, we're moving to a federated system where there's uniqueness. Groups are getting together and forming their own group. And if I can go back to whether you're First Nations and speak for First Nations, or if you weren't born that, you're not a legitimate speaker, that starts to segment our society into various groups. And that leads to a federal system rather than the union system that we have. And that then takes the public sector and moves it outside of our current structure and changes the nature of our public organizations to address the segmentation in our society, not the common society. How do you see the engagement of people from minority groups to facilitate the development of the union or the federation? Is that a fair question? You follow what I'm saying?
I follow what you're saying, and any question you ask is a fair question. So I think if we go back to your beginning premise, and again, this is going to be one of these questions where you're probably going to probably either want to talk to me after, or you're going to walk out of the room unhappy with what I have to say. But I'm going to give you, if we actually think about the founding of this nation, think about the founding of this nation, we ended up with English Protestants coming and French Catholics. So we already were divided. So this notion that we were a union is a comfortable story we tell ourselves. We never were. The compromises that were made between those two central provinces, we still see today. We've never moved past it. And so I know we would like to talk about being this unified, romantic Canada. We can have a wonderful historic conversation. We aren't actually that. And we simply have to take a look at the notwithstanding clause that was built into our Constitution. So the only way we could get a constitution in Canada with the provinces was to give them all an out. So the one unifying document that we should actually have, which is the constitution of the country, we actually went to the provinces and said, but you all get an out. Now, Quebec has used it a lot of times because they will tell you that the union was fraught from the beginning. So I know, you're looking for an answer that ties us together. And I think we have to find enough commonality in our distinctiveness as human beings in sharing and recognizing that the very fabric of the nation was built on an aspiration that we would all be one kind. And what I'm here to say is from the very beginning, the founding of this country was never that we'd be one kind. And if you look again at the history of Ontario, Quebec, the 4 original partners in the Constitution, we've actually never fully been unified. So I'm sure it's not necessarily as directive as an answer as you want, and you may disagree, but it's the best answer I can give you.
I wasn't looking for an answer. I'm looking at the phenomenon of what's happening. And if I can give an example, what I'm talking about, the human rights legislation was built on the basis that we're going to have commonality. And it's starting to be differentiation then. We're getting groups that form on the basis of their religion, on the basis of their sex, on the basis of their backgrounds. And so that's leading to differentiation rather than commonality. So the instruments we're developing for I'm just interested in the way we're moving.
Yep.
And what transformation that's going to make in the public sector in terms of public administration, and how do we reflect what representation is with this changing structure. And I think the future is not today manifest. The future is going to be totally different than what we have now. And because I think we're going to a federated model. And that's going to lead to all kinds of different types of organizations and different institutions. Schools are not going to be the common school. They're going to be segmented. We're going to fragment the schools into various categories in that.
Yeah, I don't.
Anyway, that's where I was coming from. It wasn't a statement of wishing for. Right. It was a statement of what's happening and where are we going to.
And so again, I think it's it's a important area for us to discuss. And so I always frame things as, again, as someone who immigrated to Canada, and I appreciate the question Julie asked me, my decision to want to be Canadian is also framed by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that is part of our Constitution. People want to separate, but it's actually foundational to our Constitution. And so without getting legalistic, Section 15 of the Canadian Constitution, 15 Section 1 is about equality rights, but 15.2 is about equity, and it recognizes the distinctiveness as a pathway. And it says in Section 15.2, and I'll paraphrase on this, there are probably legal scholars in the room who know it verbatim, that public institutions can put together programs, initiatives to ameliorate the socio-historical disadvantage of certain groups. And so you have to recognize the groups if you're actually going to apply equity on the pathway to equality. I want equality. I am no different than the incredible Reverend Dr. Martin Luther Jr., who wanted an aspiration and a dream. I fundamentally believe as a Canada, our way to get there is through equity. And so equity requires a recognition of distinctiveness. And so I'm not, again, the federation, the notion of the union, but that is where we are. Am I optimistic that we can get past it? I'm an educator. I'm always optimistic that we can get past it. But I think it's going to be a bit messy till we get there.
Thank you, Jerome.
You're
I can
welcome.
say we've got a question online,
Sure.
and
We do
I've got a
have a
good
few.
view of the audience. I think perhaps the esteemed Liz Durrett also has a question.
So we
No?
have one from Wilfred Atang. Hi, Dr. Jerome. You talked about having to constantly prove yourself. How did you navigate those times, and at what point did you know that you were enough and didn't need anyone else's validation?
I constantly feel like I'm proving myself even now. And again, part of it is academia. I'm not alone in this, right? I think as academics, we are constantly having to prove ourselves. But when you walk in a room and no one in the room looks like you, it's isolating. It doesn't mean everyone in the room is racist. 100%. I don't look at this audience and think, oh my gosh, it's full of racists. But it's isolating when you're either the only one or you're among a few. On Friday, I'm doing a presentation in Winnipeg to 2 different groups, but I think it's about 200 school teachers. And we're going to talk about this notion of belonging and othering. When people look at you and you aren't sure if your words are going to be taken as representing the group. So I always say, I'm a simple brown man. Nobody voted me in to speak on behalf of all brown people. That piece of constantly feeling like, okay, I got to be really careful what I say here because someone might think I actually am speaking on behalf of the global majority of brown people. And by the way, we are the global majority. I mean, that's just, again, the truth, right? And so you constantly feel like it. In terms of when did I know? This is, so I joked with Julia and Angela that somebody commented to my partner, Janet, there's not enough of a love story in the book. When Janet chose me against all the odds of what the world told her, her family and society told her she should be choosing, when she chose me. And that's why I fundamentally believe that love is what will bring us together. I think if you love humanity, if you care deeply about people, about individuals, and about their lives and their hopes and their aspirations, then you can make sure someone knows they're enough. And it sounds kind of corny, like, one of these kind of Christmas time Hallmark movies, but if you can give someone the sense that they are enough just the way they are, that's all it took. It's all it took for me was to know that with all my imperfections, I was enough.
I'm going to Liz.
Okay, hi, my name is Lisha.
Hello, Alicia.
Hi, and I work in ISAC. I'm from Jamaica. One of the problems we have, which most of you might not know, yes, we are good at athletics. We have fast runners, and yes, we have great food and good weather. But one of the problems we have is identifying with our blackness. And so even as a young girl, I'm told that we use the phrase to put milk in my coffee, meaning that the young man that I choose or to date must be browner than I am so that my children will look pretty, And so over the years, our young people tend to bleach, we call it bleach their skin. And so there is a browning pandemic, I believe, for young people because they don't wish to identify as black anymore because in Jamaica, being black represents a certain level of hardship, which most of us wouldn't want to their experience. So how do you re-educate these young people to get to appreciate themselves? I know for me it starts in the home, and so I teach my children, to love themselves, from early. I remember my first daughter, she is PR here. She is much darker than I am. And one of the evenings, she was in the bathroom for a very long time, taking a shower. And when I went in, she was told that the longer she stay is the lighter she will look. So she was trying to wash some of the darkness away. Now, when I take her to some places, while she was young, persons would say, you're pretty for a black girl. And over time, I had to, get rid of all of that kind of toxic message and teach her how beautiful she is. So how do we now get, or I would get the young people in my own Jamaican community to love this black skin, this original brown skin, if that's what it is? Because it's not that browning is wrong, but when you have to use chemicals to bleach away the blackness to be brown because you feel that is what will make you acceptable in your own community, among your own people, that to me is a real problem.
Yeah, and my heart breaks for you and your children. Like, it absolutely does. It's just, it's first, I mean, you've identified what is a large societal problem. Again, this is the piece I'm always try to be really straight up with people. I don't think white people are inherently racist. I just don't think they have to live in the world we live in. And so there's a lot of people who racially are white who have no idea that one of the biggest cosmetic industries is skin whitening creams. And for black and brown communities, like, it is a major commodity. And the amount of young people who will spend money they don't have in some cases, and it doesn't matter if you're from Jamaica, elsewhere in the Caribbean, South America, places in South Asia, like, it is a major, major commodity, because the aspiration of whiteness, again, this isn't about white people, the aspiration of whiteness. And again, we could talk about, why are wedding dresses white? Why? Well, it's a sign of purity. So what are we equating whiteness with? Right? So why do we have these white standards, and then we expect our black and brown and indigenous children to not feel inferior? And we've known this for ages. For those of you who can remember the Brown versus Board of Education case, now I'll switch to my educator side, right? When they held the trials in the United States of desegregation of the schools, one of the fundamental studies they used was Doctors Mamie and Kenneth Clark, psychologists, and it's referred to colloquially as the doll study. They put children as young as age 3 and 4 on the stand, and they gave them a white doll and a black doll, and they said, describe the dolls. Well, the white doll was beautiful, it was smart, it was intelligent, the black doll was dirty and stupid and ugly. The moment they come into this world. And so it's in the family and every segment of society. It's their teachers, it's their preschool teachers, it's their caregivers, it's their moms, their dads, their aunts, and their uncles. We've all got to be on the same page with this. And so, yeah, I mean, again, this is, again, I smile because I think we can, I'm going to remain optimistic we can shift this conversation. I mean, again, I'm a social scientist and a researcher. We'll just put the evidence out there, right? It has been in the last, I'm trying to remember what year we're in. I think it's been in the last 15 years since we actually had a black female model on things like Vogue. Before that, the very first time we had a black female on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, like, hasn't been, so our notions of beauty, absolutely. Our notions of intelligence, we have a history in science. Again, we will say that we wanted to move away from eugenics. But we have a history in science. I mean, again, some of you will know this, Carl Linnaeus, the person who invented binomial nomenclature, right? Most of us who took high school biology, right? And so that, Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s came up with a racialized taxonomy, 100%. And who's at the top? White Europeans. So people say, oh, it's like, you could read the history of this thing. So my only comment to you is, don't give up, but realize they got like a 400-year head start on us. We got some sprinting to do. So I know that's probably a longer answer than what you wanted, but you get me going.
Do you want to ask the question?
Yeah.
One follow-up from the online audience. It's in a similar vein from Ed Smith. Do you have any advice for mixed parents raising brown children in Canada, and particularly any insights you have found lead to confident and insightful kids?
Well, I'm going to look at my beautiful brown daughter, who has entire life known that her dad identifies as brown. Simple brown man. I'm a brown man. My partner, I mentioned, and it isn't to play on sympathy, one of her docs she's dealing right now, an incredibly talented hematologist, actually just asked for a copy of my book. This is a hematologist who is unbelievable in terms of dealing with blood cancers, originally from Egypt, an immigrant. And he looked at my partner and said, well, yeah, of course, I'm a brown man too. I want to read that book. Like, you got to be comfortable in your skin to start with, and you got to make sure your kids know that, right? Your kids have got to know you are comfortable in your skin. You know, age appropriate, explaining to them how to navigate the world. And the truth bomb. I'm looking at one of my colleagues from Isaac. I'm not sure we had this conversation, but we had a great conversation. I tell this story, and again, this is never meant to offend. These are truths. I tell the story of when my 3 kids got their driver's license at 16. And so I explain to people, if you want to understand the simplest sort of understanding of white privilege, here's the conversation I had with each of my 3 kids when they turned 16 and got their driver's license. And it goes like this, and it's based on truth. If you get pulled over by the police, just stop. If they tell you to roll down the window and give over all your ID, just give it. If they tell you to get out of your car and get on your knees, do it. And I said it to my daughter and to my sons. If they tell you to lie down, face flat on the ground, even if you know you've done nothing wrong, do it. Because I want you to come home alive. If you're Indigenous, Black, or brown, there's a pretty good likelihood you've told that story or some version of it to your kids. If you're white, you may not have ever had to. We know how we have to equip our kids. And my 3 kids all heard that story because I want them to come home alive. Not because I believe every policeman is racist, but I know the stats. The stats in this country and in the US is if you're a Black male, Black female, Indigenous male, Indigenous female, and depending on your hue of brownness, the likelihood is you are more likely to die in a police altercation. So I don't say police are, I just say these are the stats. Like, we can just look at the evidence in front of us. At age appropriate, you gotta teach your kids. You gotta teach your kids how to navigate the world.
Question.
It's usually only a matter of time before I say something. I wanted to add just a little bit on to what you just said, because we did have a really good conversation about it. And I think it's to the white parents to talk to their kids about how to keep their Black friends safe. Because white kids don't have that same conversation with their parents, and then that can really endanger their Black, brown, Indigenous friends. So while we're having the conversation of getting our kids to come home to us, please have the conversation with your children about how to make sure that their friends go home. I have one other thing.
Of course.
I have a very close friend who is a teacher. She's a Black teacher in Ontario. And we talk all the time about how she is still often the only Black teacher in her whole district. And she's in, I believe it's Halton region. And if anybody knows anything about Ontario, there is really no reason why she should be the only Black teacher in that region. And I just wonder what you have to say about having representation in the classroom all the way through education, because I couldn't think of one single teacher from my whole elementary, high school time in Pancor, Quebec, and Cornwall, Ontario, where I had a teacher who even remotely looked like me. And when I, and I think about like when I started working at the university, some of the people that I started to really cling to were people like Liz Durrett, Indigenous women who I saw in leadership positions around campus and who I saw and who embraced me as well. So I just think I want to know what you think about representation within the classroom, because I know that that's something that I'd like to see in Saskatoon.
Yeah, so I mean the simple answer, and it's not simple. Representation does matter, and we know this. So this is where I look to white women, and you know this. You know this. You know how hard you've had to fight to even scratch the glass ceiling. And I'm not saying you've broken through it yet. You know how hard that's been. It's why within a university context, it's good that I think on the University of Canada survey from 2019, I think they reported just under 49% of senior administrators in university are women, predominantly white women. But that's important because, again, because of the work I do, I actually do care a lot about all of the social inequities and inequalities. But what's happened is in that fight, brown, black, and Indigenous people got left behind. And we know this. Again, the data is clear on this. So while the road to gender equality is still a long way, the people who are actually advancing are white women. Like that's, again, all the data shows us that. So representation matters. What ends up happening, and I'm going to say this about Indigenous males, black males, and brown males, we're actually dissuaded from going into education. We actually are dissuaded from going in. For me to find my way into a faculty of education, elementary, French as a second language, was to go against the tide of my life. Everyone was telling me I should be going through a science program. You'd be a lawyer, you'd be a doctor, because there's some black and brown people in those positions, so that's where you fit. I'm like, yeah, but I actually think I want to be a teacher, and I think I want to be an elementary school teacher. It takes a lot, and I don't pretend to be tougher. I've just learned in my life, if there's a barrier, I'm going to try and break through it. They're not easy. So the representation matters. The role models matter. I think, we need lots of women in senior leadership positions, and I think they ought to be white, Indigenous, black, and brown. And I'll give up my job for one of them. So, if you're a Indigenous, black, or brown woman and you want my job, we'll come have a conversation. I'll make room for you. I do expect you to be able to do the job. And I'm looking at someone who probably thinks she can, so, but that matters. You need the role models, and you need people to navigate the system. It's why, again, I look at Angela. It's why that position is so critically important, for the university, but for young Indigenous people to look and say, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can. Maybe if I work hard enough, and I do make all the appropriate sacrifices, and I, get some of the noise out of my life that might detract me from moving forward. It's why Liz Durrett actually matters to the university. It's why George matters to the university. It's why Sandra matters to the university. Because if you can't see yourself here, it's hard to imagine that you're supposed to be here. And so we got a lot of work to do in the education system. We are making some improvements. I know that district actually quite well. I think the Halton district just appointed a black woman superintendent. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
I would also add to that as children having positive experiences in elementary, middle school, and high school is essential for them to want to be at the front of the classroom. And when they don't have those positive experiences, why would they want to be a teacher, right? Why would they want to be anywhere near education, period? They're trying to get away from it. And it's also about generational poverty, right? Teachers typically don't make a lot of money, and you're told to go and make lots of money and get the family out of generational poverty. So there's so many different things that couple it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jerome, for your generosity of spirit and being here tonight, given everything that's going on for you right now. You know, we've had several great talks, and I'm just wondering, on a day-to-day basis, when you're going through those microaggressions, when, you know, your people aren't around you, how do you continue to persevere in spite of all of that?
I'm human like everyone else, and even in writing the book, and you know, and I have my moments. I have my moments. You know, I used to make the joke, I'd be better off driving a milk truck. I'd just be better off than trying to change the world. Then I show up to work. And I think, you know, it is what Angela said. There is an indigenous kid, a black kid, a brown kid who's counting on me. There's a kid counting on me to make the world a little more kind, a little more generous, a little more loving. And again, the work that I do, yeah, it's disruptive. It's to move forward notions of equity. You know, again, you know, people talk about equality being like this, right? And when I always say, okay, but for 500 years, it's been like this. You want to go from this to this without kind of going through a bit of, again, if any of you have ever actually watched a balance scale, it rarely goes here and hits, there's usually a bit of a teetering. And so I remind myself, we got to teeter a little bit. We will get to this. And I want to be part of it. Like, I actually want to be part of it. I want to look at my amazing children and their partners, who I think are also probably on this call. And I want to be able to say to them, you know, the life I lived, it was to make a better world for you. Not just, you know, like socioeconomically. I want to take some of the sharp edges away. I look to some of the other folks in the community who are also suffering and marginalized and take a heavy brunt. And there's folks in our extended community who are living through periods right now that I wouldn't wish on anyone. And I'm doing it for them too. Because I fundamentally believe we all deserve dignity. We deserve dignity. We share a humanity. We're going to have to work hard to get there. It won't be easy. And then I remind myself. And then occasionally, I'll go get a third coffee. Then occasionally I'll go get a third coffee and think, okay, I'm just going to juice myself. That's my juice. Other people, you know, do the 5 o'clock wine or whatever. I'm like, I just go get a third coffee.
Okay. So we good? You got a question? George. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to hear your life story and to share your experiences. And I've also continuing to learn that you're also a scholar in these very important issues. So, and you've also made a number of suggestions, recommendations. But I wonder, first of all, would you want to write my book?
No, but I'd like you to star in the movie. You could be me. You're a handsome fellow. You come play me.
At least you know you're brown.
Yes, I do.
My jacket is black. I'm not sure what I am. My kids, we had this debate a long time ago, and I simplified to them. I told them, just say you're black. Anyway, so 1, 2, 3 things. Call to action. In this university, we have a lot of great priorities: indigenization, EDI, anti-racism. What's 1, 2, or 3 things we can do today together, black, white, and be able to accelerate this institution in making greater progress?
Way to use that microphone.
Yeah. So as an institution, if if I was given the opportunity, and again, I recognize, everybody's got ideas. I actually think we need to take a look at our data and break our data down. So, who is succeeding? And let's break it down, women, let's look at non-binary, let's look at racialization. Who is succeeding, who isn't succeeding? Again, everybody gets admitted to the university. Everybody has to meet a minimum threshold. So everyone who's here is supposed to be here. We have these conversations, so-and-so's English isn't good enough. It's like, they met every requirement and they're here. If you're not happy, change your requirements. But once they get here, you let them in and you took their money. So let's take a look at, our success, who is succeeding? Not just retention. I don't ever like the language of retention. I say persistence to graduation because they're supposed to graduate. So just staying here for 9 years, I'm not celebrating that. You need to persist and graduate. Oh, and when you graduate, we should check, do you still feel fully whole? Did you lose some of who you are? I think if we started to look at the data, right? If we started to look at the policies, I work, again, in terms of my critical race scholarship, I work in critical policy analysis. Let's put the policy under the microscope and let's look at the policy and who does the policy benefit and who does it harm, and not just sort of conjecture. Let's look at the data. I'm a huge believer as a social scientist in looking at the evidence. And so that's, I talk about, to Charlene's comment about lack of representation. It makes no sense. In Canada, 22% of our population is racialized. So we should have 22% of those racialized people right across the board. There's no reason, unless you think we're not smart enough, or we don't work hard enough, or all of the racial tropes. So let's put the data out there. That's where I would start. And then I would start also taking a look at the policies. I'm a huge pain in the backside to the folks who work in HR. Absolutely. Because I say this, almost everyone who applies has to complete some sort of a declaration on whether or not they're from an equity deserving group. Okay, so what do we do with all that data? Like, we know how many people apply. We know how many of them will then end up potentially getting an interview. And we know how many might get a job. Well, why don't we look at the data? So what percentage actually apply? What percentage move along? We could do it with tenure and promotion, right? Who's actually getting tenure? And again, you got hired, so you had to meet the minimum criteria. Someone hired you assuming that you were going to be able to compete for tenure and that you might be eligible at some point for promotion. All right, what does the data tell us? That's where I would start, George.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up, or you want to do it?
No, you go ahead.
So I want to thank Dr. Cranston for sharing his life with us, his family with us, and his experiences. It's opened up so many eyes and great questions today from the audience and online. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Paulson, for creating a space for this to happen. So we do have some refreshments in the back, so please stay and have a chat and have something to drink and enjoy your evening.
Thanks, and thank you to Megan. Thank you. Thank you, Julia.
No
I'm not sure what happened.
problem. Can I ask you all to humor me for 1 minute while I present Jerome?